Back to politics now. Labour have said that if elected, they will modernise and reform the UK's gender laws to remove what they call indignities for trans people. They also say they will protect single-sex spaces. Joining me now to talk about this is Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting. Good morning to you. What does the policy do then? How does it differ from what we have already?
Well, at the moment, in order to obtain a gender recognition certificate, trans people have to go through a process that I think they feel is quite degrading and tortuous in terms of the requirements that are placed on them to demonstrate they're living their lives in their assumed gender. And what we want to do is to simplify the process by still requiring a diagnosis of gender dysphoria in order to obtain legal recognition, so a doctor would still be involved, but trying to take out some of that unnecessary and degrading part of the process to make sure that trans people can, who want a gender recognition certificate, so we're talking about a very small number of people here, but to make sure that they have an experience that is much more respectful, and so they can live their lives with freedom, dignity and respect.
A small number of people, as you say. How many is that?
Well, in terms, off the top of my head, I can't remember how many people have registered for a gender recognition certificate, but we are talking about a very small number of people. There are lots of people who might consider themselves trans who wouldn't want a legal recognition, but, we're talking about a very small number of people regardless.
Less than half of 1% define themselves as either being non-binary or trans, whereas more than half the country are female. Who's more important?
Well, everyone's important as far as we're concerned, and in terms of women's rights, women's spaces, women's voices, the last Labour government in our Equality Act made very clear provision for the protection of single-sex spaces, and that's biological sex, and I think that's very important, particularly in those spaces, whether hospital wards or prisons or services that are designed for female survivors of male violence against women and girls. It's really important that in some contexts that when we talk about women's rights, women's spaces, women's voices, that we are protecting those as single-sex spaces. And should we be elected at the next general election, the next Labour government will be committed to that too, just as the last Labour government was.
Some of your supporters don't think you're going far enough, notably J.K. Rowling, the famous author who withdrew her support for Labour over the weekend because she's not comfortable with what Labour is doing in relation to protecting women's rights.
Well, Labour's got a proud record when it comes to tackling violence against women and girls, promoting equality for women, and in fact you look at Labour's top team, if we win the next general election, we'll have Britain's first woman Chancellor, as well as other senior women in the Labour Party. Our candidate for Deputy Prime Minister is a woman, our candidate for Home Secretary is a woman, our candidate for Education Secretary is a woman, Justice Secretary, I could go on. I think though that
but you know there are members in your party who are uncomfortable with this as well.
Well, actually, I think we've got to a good place in our manifesto, and I think there are lots of people who've been reassured by Labour's position on this. This has been a difficult conversation, and not just within the Labour Party, but within our country, because we have had some tension between how you treat trans people with dignity and respect and inclusion, and also make sure that women's rights, voices, spaces are protected. And, I think that feel very optimistic, in fact, about the fact that we can reconcile those two things and move forward together as a country if we have a political culture that's about bringing people together and navigating our way through these conversations with respect, genuinely listening to different perspectives, rather than seeing these differences as divisions to be exploited, in frankly the way I think we've seen from the current government. So I think there is a way forward. I think we're in a better place now, But we have to take criticism on the chin and recognise that there is always more work to do when it comes to building trust. We're not taking anything for granted at this election generally. And on this debate in particular, and this conversation, I think it is really important that people feel able to speak up, to speak out, to voice their concerns without feeling like they're being silenced or shut down. And that's the approach that a Labour government would take if we are elected on the 4th of July. OK, I know you want to talk teeth this morning, you want to talk dental care. The Lib Dems have beaten you to it, and they've put a figure of £750 million that they've costed up and will spend on improving dental care. With Labour, on the other hand, how have you done in Wales when it comes to NHS dental care? Well, I'd say two things, and I say this with respect to the Liberal Democrats. The advantage of being a smaller party at this election is that you can put out a whole load of policies without ever being held to account for delivering them.
Come on, that's a bit patronising. That is a bit patronising. It's a serious policy idea from them that
it's just true.
A lot of people will agree with.
Yeah, and look, we've got to make difficult choices, recognising that the public finances are in a state, and so are family finances. All of Labour's policies are fully costed, fully funded, promises we can keep and promises the country could afford. And our first step is 700,000 more emergency dentist appointments to deal with the immediate crisis, but also the fundamental contract reform that's needed to rebuild NHS dentistry. Last year, we had a £400 million underspend in the NHS dentistry budget, despite the fact we've got lots of people being priced out and lots of people being, paying through the nose to go private. So I think it's an absurd
Wales, Mr. Streeting. How are you doing in Wales, Wes Streeting, where you are running NHS dental care? How's it going in Wales so far?
Well, right across the country, in every corner of the United Kingdom, the NHS is under pressure. I've always been clear about the fact that the decisions that are taken in Westminster, although health is devolved, decisions taken in Westminster do either help or hinder the job in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And that's why...
Because the Conservatives say 93% of people in Wales are waiting to sign up. Sorry to interrupt you. I know there's a bit of a delay on this, so I appreciate your patience with that. The Conservatives say 93% of people in Wales are waiting for an NHS dentist, which isn't exactly success, is it?
I think the Conservatives have got a barefaced cheek to talk about other people's record on the NHS. They should take responsibility for their own. We've got the worst crisis in the history of the NHS under this Conservative government. That's why the Prime Minister doesn't want to talk about it and is running away from it. It's why the Health Secretary is nowhere to be seen in this campaign. The only place she appears is in national newspapers vying to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. I think that's a disgrace. She should be on your programme today apologising for her government's abysmal record in every part of the NHS. What is indisputable is that the last Labour government delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in the NHS. We did it before. With the country's support, we will do it again. And it won't just be improvements in England that people see. A Labour government in Westminster will create a rising tide to lift all ships in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is why the SNP admit a Labour government will be better for Scotland and why people in Scotland should send Scottish Labour MPs to replace the Conservatives rather than sending SNP MPs simply to complain about them.
Wes Streeting, thank you.
Thank you.